So let us step back in time to 168 years ago, to August of 1858. Pretend you're there with us at this time. You're encouraged to take sides, cheer, laugh, applaud, join in. You're also challenged to listen carefully and make up your own mind as we will host a discussion briefly and ask you questions before the traditional Q&A begins at the end. Knowing the historic debates were 3 hours, we have asked each candidate to edit their speeches to the entire event, including this introduction and the discussion to follow that will take place in a little less than an hour. As they did here in Washington Square, in Ottawa, Illinois in 1858, Senator Douglas will begin and Abraham Lincoln will respond. And then Douglas will be given the last word. So at this time,
ladies and gentlemen, please join us as we welcome our Senator Stephen Douglas.
Ladies and gentlemen, I appear before you today for the purpose of discussing the leading political questions which now agitate the public mind. By an arrangement between Mr. Lincoln and myself, we are present here today for the purpose of having a joint discussion as the representatives of the two great political parties of state and union, upon the principles and issues between those parties and this vast concourse of people, concourse of people shows the deep feeling which pervades the public mind in regard to the questions dividing us. Prior to 1854, this country was divided into two great political parties, known as the Whig Party and the Democratic Party. Both were national, both were patriotic, advocating principles that were universal in their application. An old-time Whig could proclaim his principles in Louisiana and Massachusetts alike. Whig principles had no boundaries or sectional lines. They were not limited by the Ohio River, nor by the Potomac, nor by the line of free states and slave states, but applied and were proclaimed wherever the Constitution ruled and the American flag waved. Wherever the American flag waved over American soil. So it was, and so it is, with the great Democratic Party, which from the days of Thomas Jefferson until this period has proven itself to be the historic party of the nation. But in 1854, Mr. Abraham Lincoln and Mr. Trumbull entered into an arrangement, one with the other, and each with their respective friends, to dissolve the old Whig Party on the one hand, and dissolve the old Democratic Party on the other, and to disconnect the members of both and reunite them as an abolitionist party disguised as a Republican Party. The terms of that arrangement between Mr. Lincoln and Mr. Trumbull have been published to the world by Mr. Lincoln's special friend, James Matheny. And they were that Lincoln should have Shield's seat in the United States Senate, which was then about to be vacant, and that Mr. Trumbull should have my seat when my term expired. Lincoln went to work to abolitionize the old Whig Party, pretending that he was then as good a Whig as ever. And Trumbull went to work in his part of the state, preaching abolitionism in its milder and lighter form, and trying to abolitionize the Democratic Party, and bring all Democrats handcuffed and bound by hand and foot into the abolitionist camp. In pursuance of this arrangement, the parties met in Springfield, Illinois in October of 1854 and proclaimed their new platform. Lincoln was to bring the abolitionist camp into the camp, the old Whigs, and transfer them over to Joshua Reed Giddings, Samuel P. Chase, Frederick Douglass, and Parson Owen Lovejoy, who were ready to receive them and christen them in their new faith. They laid down on that occasion a platform for the new Republican Party, which was to be thus constructed. I have the resolution of their state convention then held, which was the first mass state convention he ever held in Illinois of the black-hearted Republicans. And I now hold them in my hands here. Among other things, that constitutional convention said, or that Republican convention said, to prohibit, that they met for the following purposes: to prohibit the admission of any more slave states into the Union, to abolish slavery in the District of Columbia, to exclude slavery from all the territories over which the general government has exclusive jurisdiction, and to resist the acquirement of any new territories, unless the practice of slavery therein forever shall have been prohibited. Having formed this new party for the benefit of the deserters from Whiggery and deserters from democracy, and having laid down their abolitionist platform, which I have just read, Lincoln now takes his stand and proclaims his abolitionist doctrines. Let me read a part of that. In his speech at Springfield to the convention which nominated him for the Senate, Mr. Lincoln said, and I quote, "In my opinion, it will not cease until a crisis shall have been reached and passed. A house divided against itself cannot stand. I believe this government cannot endure. Permanently half slave and half free. I do not expect the Union to be dissolved. I do not expect the house to fall, but I do expect it will cease to be divided. It will become all one thing or all the other. Either the opponents of slavery will arrest the further spread of it and place it where the public mind shall rest in the belief that in the course of ultimate extinction, or its advocates will push it forward until it shall become alike lawful in all states, old as well as new, north as well as south." Mr. Lincoln, in the extract from which I have just read, says that this government cannot endure permanently in the same condition in which it was made by the framers of our Constitution, divided into free and slave states. He says that it has existed for about 70 years, thus divided, yet he tells you that he believes it cannot endure permanently on the same principles and in the same relative condition in which our founding fathers made it. I do not question Mr. Lincoln's conscientious beliefs, but why can it not exist divided into free states and slave states? George Washington, Thomas Jefferson, Benjamin Franklin, James Madison, Hamilton, Jay, and a great men of the day made this government divided into free states and slave states and left each state perfectly free to do as it pleased on the subject of slavery. Why can it not exist on these same principles on which our founding fathers made it? They knew when they framed the Constitution that in a country as wide and as broad as this, with such a variety of climate, production, and interests, the people necessarily require different laws and institutions in different localities. They knew that the laws and regulations which would suit the granite hills of New Hampshire would be unsuited for the rice plantations of South Carolina. And they therefore provided that each state shall retain its own legislature and its own sovereignty, with the full and complete power to do as it pleased within its own limits in all that was local and not national. One of those reserved rights of the states was the right to regulate the relationship between master and servant on the slavery question. Did you know that at the time of our Constitution, when it was framed, there were 13 states in the Union, and 12 of them were slave-holding states, and one was a free state? Suppose this doctrine of uniformity, preached by Mr. Lincoln, that the states should all be free to be all slave, had prevailed. What would have been the result? The slave-holding states would have overruled the one free state, and slavery would have been fastened to the constitutional provision on every square inch of this American Republic, instead of being left, as our fathers wisely left it, to each state to decide for itself. Now, my friends, if we will only act conscientiously and rigidly upon this great principle of popular sovereignty, which guarantees each state and territory the right to do as it pleases on all things, local and domestic, instead of Congress interfering, we will continue at peace one with another. I'm told that my time is out. Mr. Lincoln shall now address you, and then I shall reply to him. Thank you.
Man hears himself somewhat misrepresented. It provokes him. At least I find that to be the case with myself. But when that misrepresentation becomes rather gross and palpable, I think it's apt to abuse him. So, firstly, I think it's fit to notice that the fact that Judge Douglas alleges that myself and Mr. Trumbull, after running through the history of the old Whig and Democratic parties, he alleges that myself and Mr. Trumbull had made some sort of an arrangement back in '54. Secondly, he read some resolutions as being part of the platform of the Republican Party in 1854. And this is my answer to those resolutions and this notion. I never had anything to do with those resolutions. And I think Trumbull never had either. Judge Douglas cannot show that either one of us had anything to do with those resolutions. What I believe is true about those resolutions is this. There was a call for a convention to form a Republican Party in Springfield. And I think my friend Mr. Lovejoy had a hand in it. And I believe it is also true, I know it is also true, that I was away from Springfield when that convention was in session. I had to attend court in Tazewell County. Now, they placed my name without my authority on the list of committee members. And then after doing so, they wrote me asking if I would come to the meeting. But I could not, and I did not. So, I never had anything to do with that particular meeting he's referencing. That is the plain truth of the matter about those particular resolutions. Now, the story that Mr. Douglas tells, the good senator, Judge Douglas as I'm fond of calling him, of myself and Trumbull selling out the old Democrat Party and the old Whig Party, making an agreement at that meeting, I have this to say. Judge Douglas has no means of knowing this. I do have the means of knowing about this, because I was not there, and neither was he. So, there's no way to disprove a negative charge in logic. Logically, a man cannot prove a negative. But logic also demands that when a man poses an affirmative, he gives some sort of proof about that affirmative. So, while I certainly cannot introduce any testimony to show the negative about anything, specifically that, I can say logically that if a man affirmatively says he knows a thing, then he must show how he knows it. I don't think it's really satisfactory to simply say that he's being conscientious about it. Now, I hate to waste my time on these kinds of things, but there is a general tilt to Judge Douglas's tone that implies an abolitionist color to my comments. He says that I was engaged at that time in selling out, abolitionizing the old Whig Party. Well, I hope you'll permit me to read a part of a printed speech that I made in Peoria, in which I will show a rather different view of my sentiments at the time during the contest of 1854. This is what I said. Regarding the repeal of the Missouri Compromise, I think, and I shall try to show, that it is wrong. Wrong in its direct effect, allowing slavery into Kansas and Nebraska, but also wrong in its prospective principle, allowing it to spread to every other part of the wide world where men can be found inclined to take it. There is a declared indifference, and this indifference, I think, is a hidden, a covert zeal for the spread of slavery. I cannot but hate this. I hate it because of the monstrous injustice of slavery itself. I hate it because it deprives our Republican example. Go ahead. And it deprives our Republican example of its just influence in this world. It enables the enemies of free institution worldwide, with some plausibility, to mock us and taunt us as hypocrites. It causes the real friends of freedom to doubt our very sincerity, and especially because this thing forces so many good people amongst us into an open war with the very fundamental principles of this republic, the principles of civil liberty, criticizing the Declaration of Independence and insisting that there is no right principle for action except self-interest. Now, before proceeding, let me say here that I have no particular prejudice against Southern people. I believe that they are just what we would have been had we been put in their circumstance. If slavery had already existed among us, we would not have just instantly gotten rid of that thing either. and if it had not already existed amongst them, I really don't think they would have introduced it. I've always believed this to the people, north as well as south. Now, doubtless there were people on both sides that never would have had a slave under any circumstances. And I think there were people on both sides now who would gladly reintroduce it if it were now out of existence. Now, when Southerners remind us of their constitutional rights, I acknowledge them, and not grudgingly, but fully, fairly. But all of this, in my judgment, furnishes no more excuse for permitting slavery to go into our own free territory than it would for revising or dispensing with the African slave trade against which there is now a law. The law that forbids the bringing of slaves from Africa, that which has so long forbid the taking of them, and also, I say here for that law. But the law which now allows them to be taken into Nebraska, they are both founded on the same moral principle. The prohibition against taking them into the territories was founded on the principle that slavery is wrong, just like the law against the African slave. So, my friends, I do not wish to read any more from my former sentiments. But this is the true complexion of what I have said in regard to the institution of slavery and the black race. I will say here, while on this particular subject, that I have no purpose, directly or indirectly, to interfere with the institution of slavery in the places where it already exists in the South. I have no lawful right to do so, and I have no inclination to do so. But I do hold that, notwithstanding all of this, that there is no reason in the world why a black man cannot enjoy the same rights and liberties propounded by our Charter of Liberty, the Declaration of Independence, the right to life, liberty, the pursuit of happiness, as well as any white man. Now, let me just look at my time. Oh, I have not used up quite as much time as I thought. I'll go a little longer on some of these subjects which the judge has brought up. He read from my speech in Springfield in which I said a house divided against itself cannot stand. Does the judge think it can? Well, he does not seem to be attending to me right now. I don't know whether he does or not. But if he does, this is not a question of veracity, of truthfulness between the judge, the senator, and myself. It is rather a question of veracity between the judge and a rather higher authority who first mentioned that little phrase. Well, now, my friends, I ask your attention to this particular matter, not in jest, but with something serious in mind. I know that the judge would readily agree that the maxim that was put forth by the Savior is true. But I think that he is probably going to allege that I am misapplying it. And according to the rules of debate and logic, the judge has a perfect right to do so. But I also have a perfect right to show that I do not misapply it. When he undertakes to say that because I think this nation, so far as the question of slavery is concerned, will become all one thing or all the other, that because I say that, I am in favor of bringing about a dread, dead uniformity in the various states and all of their institutions. In saying that, he argues erroneously, my friends. The great deal of local institutions in our states that spring from the difference of soil and climate and terrain and so forth, those are actually the bonds of union. They do not make a house divided against itself. They make a house united. What cannot be done on the granite hills of Connecticut can be done on the rice plantations of Louisiana. And the want of one serves the need of the other, and vice versa. And so they become the bonds of union. Not the bonds of discord. But this question of slavery, is that amongst these things to which I just referred? I leave this to you, my friends. Has this not historically been an apple of discord among us? Has this not been that which has always failed to bring a bond of union? The answer, of course, is yes. Think of it this way. This great concourse of people. Let's say the moral development that this particular generation has obtained is at a given spot. Eventually this generation will pass away and another will raise up in its place. And let's say that the succeeding generation has the same level of moral development that this generation had. And let's say that the institution of slavery will still exist in that future generation. Will it not continue then to be an apple of discord among us? Of course. So I have a perfect right to say it's logical in regard to this question, that this question is ending up with a house divided against itself. Now the judge often reminds you that the institution of slavery has existed for, what did you say, 70 odd years in this country, in some states but not in other states. And I hardly agree with that. However, I account for that because of the position in which our fathers originally placed it, that of restricting it into new territories in the West with a view to its ultimate extinction. And they legislated against it by cutting off its source, the African slave trade, which evidences their intent of restricting it into extermination. And my friends, the public mind did rest in the belief that it was on a course of ultimate extinction. But something new has taken place. Now, I do not wish to ascribe motives to the good judge, but lately I think he and those acting with him have placed the institution of slavery on a rather new basis, which looks to making it perpetual and national. That was not the position of the framers. And being placed on this new basis, I say, as I have already said multiple times, we will not have peace on this question until either the opponents of slavery will arrest its further spread in places where the public mind shall once again rest in the belief that it is indeed on a course of ultimate extinction. Or its advocates will press it forward until it becomes alike lawful in all of the states, old as well as new, north as well as south. Now, I think if we could arrest the further spread of it and place it where Washington and Jefferson and Madison first placed it, it would once again be perceived as being on a course of ultimate extinction, as it has been for some 70, 80, whatever years past. And I believe that the crisis that we now face will be over. Now, I would like to ask your attention to another portion of the Nebraska bill which Judge Douglas holds. I quote, it says, "It being the true intent and meaning of this act not to legislate slavery into any territory or state, nor to exclude it therefrom, but to leave the people thereof perfectly free to form and regulate their domestic institutions in their own way, subject only to the Constitution of the United States." Now, it has always been a puzzle to me to know why, back in 1854, the word state was included in that bill. How is that connected with this whole enterprise of permitting it now to go into the territories? Judge Douglas knows. He put it there. But we don't. So, the law, you see, the law they were passing then was not about states. It was about territories. Now, releasing slavery into the territories. What was it placed there for? Well, 3 years later, the Dred Scott decision comes down, and now we see that the people cannot exclude slavery from a territory. My friends, if another Dred Scott decision is held, and popular sovereignty is now applied to the question of slavery, does allow the people of a territory to have slavery if they want to, but that it does not allow them not to have it if they do not want to. Now, I do not mean, let's say this vast concourse of people were the residents of a territory. I do not mean to say that if there was a particular individual among you that did not want to have slaves, that this provision would force you to do it. But I do mean to say that if this vast concourse of people living in the territory did not want slavery, but one individual under these provisions did, he could bring slavery in and you would have nothing to say about it. It does not prevent a territory from disallowing slavery. So, that's what I have to say about the Dred Scott decision. Now, the Dred Scott decision is a decision of the High Court. And I'm having a hard time shaking Judge Douglas's teeth loose from this decision. It reminds me of, I used to do some hunting, and it reminds me of some kind of obstinate animal that catches its prey. Let's say a wolf catches your grandmother's little dog. And they hold on to it with a fierceness you've never seen before. Try as you might to separate them from their prey. You can cut off a leg, you can cut off 2 legs, and they will not release it. Now, Judge Douglas, and I mean no disrespect here in drawing this analogy, holds on to the Dred Scott decision like an obstinate animal. His political career has been virtually bespattered with attacks upon the court. I could take one leg and cut it off, one example of an attack against the court or another, but he still holds on. This particular decision, I cannot pry him loose from. And I believe that any further decision, such as Dred Scott in the territories, will also welcome the same vice-like grip from the judge. So, these things, I believe, show that there's a purpose in all of this. Strong is death and eternity, for which he adheres to this one decision and will not release it. So, having spoken of the Dred Scott decision, I'm pretty much done. I just have one more word. Henry Clay, who was probably my beau ideal of a politician, said one time, and it's a man that for whom I advocated throughout my political career. But what he said was, if there be a class of people who would seek to repress all of our progress towards ultimate liberty and emancipation of all, if there is a class of people among us that want to stifle and repress that progress, they must first muzzle the cannons of 1776 and their annual joyous return every 4th of July when we celebrate the Declaration of Independence. They must also dim the light of reason, which tells us all men are created equal, and that the Negro is indeed a man. And they must extinguish within the bosom of American citizens the love of liberty which God has implanted in us. If they can do those three things, then perhaps they could stop our onward progress towards emancipation of all slaves in this country. Well, to my thinking, Judge Douglas, by his example and vast influence, this man is very well known, is doing that very thing in this community and in this nation. When he says that the Negro has no share in our Declaration of Independence, in this and like communities all over this great state. I'm going to tell you something that's true. You know, in this country, what really lies at the bottom of it all is public opinion. There's no judicial decision. There's no legislative pronouncement. There's no presidential proclamation that will long stand unless it's supported by public opinion. With it, nothing can fail. Against it, nothing can succeed. Therefore, the one who shapes and molds public opinion goes deeper than all of these, because it is he who makes the enforcing or prohibiting of those things either possible or impossible. Henry Clay plainly understood this. I believe Judge Douglas is going back to the era of our revolution and to the extent of his ability, muzzling the historic cannon which thundered out the proclamation to the world of our Declaration. When he invites anyone who wishes to have slaves to have it, he is blowing out the moral lights all around us under the rubric of free choice. When he says he doesn't care whether slavery gets voted up or voted down, it's a sacred right of self-government. In my judgment, he is penetrating the human soul, eradicating not only the light of liberty, the light of reason, but extinguishing the love of liberty for all that God planted in our bosom. So my friends, when this man shall succeed, I'll say this in conclusion, by all means and applications of convincing this crowd and the various other crowds that remain in the arranged debates to back all of his sentiments, when people come into agreement with the things that he avows, his principles and scruples, all of these things that he says to these mighty questions that address our very fundamental principles, then all we need is the formality of a second Dred Scott decision that says that slavery cannot be forbidden in Illinois. That is all it will take. And slavery will be made a life lawful in all the states, old as well as new, north as well as south. That ends my chapter. I'll give it to the judge.
Fellow citizens, I will now occupy the time allotted to me in replying to Mr. Lincoln. The first point which I will call to your attention is as to what I said about the organization of the Republican Party in 1854 and the platform that was formed on the 5th of October of that year. And then I will put the question to Mr. Lincoln, whether or not he approves of each article in this platform, and ask that he give us a clear and specific reply. I did not charge him with being a member of the committee which reported that platform. I charged the platform that was the platform of the Republican Party he did not deny. But Mr. Lincoln now says that although his name was on the committee which reported it, that he doesn't think he was there. He thinks he may have been in Tazewell County holding court. But now I want to remind Mr. Lincoln that he was in Springfield when that convention was held, and those resolutions were adopted. Then again, this platform, which was made at Springfield by his own party, when he was asked to be acknowledged as the head of that party, provide the Republicans will insist on the abolition of slavery in the District of Columbia. And I asked Mr. Lincoln specifically whether or not he agreed with them. Did you get an answer? No. He's afraid to answer it. He knows I will trot down to Egypt. I intend to make him answer it there. Or I will show the people of Illinois he does not intend to answer these questions. The convention to which I have been alluding goes a little further and pledges itself to exclude slavery from all the territories over which the general government has exclusive jurisdiction, north of 36 degrees, as well as south. Now I want to know whether he approves that provision. I want him to answer, and when he does, I want to know his opinion on another point, which is whether he will redeem the pledges of that platform and resist the acquirement of any new territories unless slavery therein shall be forever prohibited. I want him to answer this last question. Each of these questions I have put before him are practical questions. And I want to know whether he is first, last, and the only choice of the party, with whom he does not agree with in principle. Is he denying the basic platform that he stands upon? He does not deny, but that principle is unanimously adopted by the Republican Party. He does not deny that the whole Republican Party is pledged to it. He does not deny that a man who is not faithful to the faithless to the Republican Party. And now I want to know whether that party is unanimously in favor of a man who does not adopt the creed and agree with them in their principles. I want to know whether the man who does not agree with them who is now afraid to avow his differences and who dodges the issues, is the first, last, and only choice of the Republican Party? The Black Republican Party stands pledged that they will never support Lincoln until he pledged himself to that platform. But he cannot devise his answer. He has not made up his mind whether or not he will or not. He talked about everything else but could think of, everything else he could think of to occupy his time, and when he could not think of anything more to say without an excuse for refusing to answer these questions, he sat down before his time was out. Mr. Lincoln wants to know why the word state, as well as territory, was put in the Nebraska bill. I will tell him and I will tell you. It was put there to meet just such a false argument, as he is deducing that first, not only the people of the territories should do as they please, but that they, when they come to be admitted to a state, they should come into the Union with or without slavery as the people determine. I meant to knock in the head this abolitionist doctrine of Mr. Lincoln, that there shall be no more slave states, even if the people want them. And it does not do for him to say, or for any Republican to say, that there is nobody in favor of the doctrine of no more slave states, and that nobody wants to interfere with the right of the people. Nobody wants to interfere with the right of the people to do as they please. What was the origin of Missouri difficulty and the Missouri Compromise? The people of Missouri formed a constitution as a slave state and asked admission to the Union. But the Free Soil Party of the North, being in a majority, refused to admit her because she had slavery as one of her institutions. Hence, this first slave agitation arose upon a state and not upon a territory. And yet, Mr. Lincoln does not know why the word state as well as territory was in the Kansas-Nebraska bill. The whole abolition agitation arose on that doctrine of prohibiting the state from coming in with slavery or not as it pleased. And that same doctrine is here in this Republican platform of 1854. It has never been repealed. And every Republican stands pledged by that platform never to vote for any man who is not in favor of it. Yet, Mr. Lincoln does not know that there is a man in the world who is in favor of preventing a state from coming in as it pleases, notwithstanding. The Springfield platform says that they, the Republican Party, will not allow a state to come in under such circumstances. If he believes this, he is an ignorant man. I have not brought a charge of moral turpitude against him. When he or any other man brings one against me, instead of disproving it, I will say that it is a lie, and let him prove it if he can. I have lived 25 years in Illinois. I have served all of you with the best fidelity and ability which I possess. And Mr. Lincoln is at liberty to attack my public actions, my votes, and my conduct. But when he dares to attack my moral integrity, now you see that upon these very points, I am as far from bringing Mr. Lincoln up to the line as ever I was before. He does not want to avow the principles. I do not want to avow mine. As clear as sunlight in midday, democracy is founded upon the eternal principle of right. Democracy is founded on the eternal principle of right. The plainer these principles are avowed before the people, the stronger will be the support which they will receive. I only wish that I had the power to make them so clear that they would shine in the heavens for every man, woman, and child to read. The first of those principles that I would proclaim would be in opposition to Mr. Lincoln's doctrine of uniformity between the different states. And I would declare instead the sovereign right of each state to decide the slavery question as well as all other domestic questions for themselves without interference from any other state or power whatsoever. When that principle is recognized, then and only then you will have peace and harmony and fraternal feelings between all the states in the Union. Until you do recognize that doctrine, there will be sectional warfare, agitating and distracting the country. What does Mr. Lincoln propose? He says that the Union cannot exist divided into free and slave states. If it cannot endure thus divided, then he must strive to make them all free or all slaves, which will inevitably bring about a dissolution of the Union. Gentlemen and gentlewomen, I'm told that my time is up, and I'm obliged to stop. Thank you.
At this time, let's hear it for Abraham Lincoln and Senator Douglas.